So I work at Near Protocol. We're building layer 1 protocol, kind of focus on improving DevX, 10x, improving UX, 10x, as a result, expanding the design space of what's possible in the blockchain applications today. And today we're going to talk about gaming. We're going to have actually people share what they're working on, just one, 2 sentences.
Sure. Hi, my name's Canaan. My project name is Stardust. We are an API for game developers to easily create blockchain assets and implement those assets in their game. We abstract away blockchain completely so that the end user does not need to know what blockchain is in order to play a game benefiting from the technology.
Hey, good evening, everyone. My name is Chase. Some of you may have known me from Alto.io, but right now I'm representing Outplay Game. Our project is basically a suite of tools for game developers that would enable them to create tournaments for the games. So a single player's game of skill can now be turned into a multiplayer tournament or a PvP tournament. That's what we're working on, and stay tuned, I guess.
Hey, I'm Lucho from Experimental. We built Crypto Wars. That's one of the most played games. I think the most played game on Loom right now. It's an RTS, so it's a real-time strategy game where you play online with other people and you compete to win prizes in crypto right now. We are also doing a bit of infrastructure that we have developed for the game and are making it available for other developers.
My name's Brett Seyler from Forte, and we're building infrastructure for game developers, kind of more tilted toward the traditional games industry to adopt blockchain and run parts of their economies on blockchain.
My name's Devin Finzer. I'm with OpenSea, which is a marketplace for game items on Ethereum. So we allow you to buy and sell things like CryptoKitties or Gods Unchained cards, things like that.
I'm Marguerite, deCourcelle, and the CEO of Blockade Games. We have a free-to-play blockchain gaming platform, and we've been working on our main title is Neon District. It's a cyberpunk RPG, and it's slated to launch this December on Steam.
Cool, maybe we can share some personal story, how you got into crypto space, when.
Sure. So in college, I was an indie game developer, did my senior thesis there on blockchain. I was a software engineer for a year after that at Bloomberg. At Bloomberg, I started the blockchain internal chat room, did every day, 800+ employees just talking, discussing what blockchain was. And from there, Stardust was the third idea I'd created and pitched my father on, only one he liked, and so therefore, here I am with Stardust.
So just a brief background of myself. I started off in finance in Singapore and found it really boring. So I moved to China to go to a sabbatical for a year, which is great because there's no stress or anything. And it became so stressful that it's not stressful. So I took a job in gaming in Chengdu. So I was doing marketing for a company called Tap for Fun, which is a free-to-play game developer, and then eventually moved to a game publishing company in China, in Shenzhen, where I was also doing marketing and growth for the company. Soon after that, I realized that I'm neither happy with finance or with game publishing as it is, and decided to co-found a company called Alto.io, which is now pivoting towards a company called Outplay Game. I'll tell you more about it in the future or later if you want to ask questions.
Okay, so my background is mainly, I've been a developer since I was a kid, also a gamer. I've been involved in crypto space since like 2011, mining Bitcoins with like GPUs that are just laying there in my house. I've been following Ethereum a lot, and when we had another company we sold that was like nothing to do with crypto, it was just a software as a service business. When we sold that, we had like all this free time we never had before. So I started digging around more on the technology and saw this opportunity to bring like all these really cool things about gaming into crypto. That was actually like a really good match for them. So we founded Experimental almost like 2 years ago. We've been developing Crypto Wars for a year and a half. When we first started, I think we started when there was like the DevCon 3 in Cancun, and everyone was saying, hey, dude, this is impossible. You will never be able to run a game on chain. But we just like say, yeah, dude, like technology is going to come, like protocols are going to be developed, and this thing is going to be possible. So now we're here.
I've been in the games industry primarily for about a decade, mostly building tech and tools that are used by game developers. A little bit of fintech experience before that, and so it's just sort of coming full circle a little bit, thinking about these problems that are overlapping a lot with DeFi problems that the crypto space is wrestling with, and so that was sort of a handful of chapters. A company called Garage Games made an engine, and it's kind of a whole line of products branded Torque, and that was very, very broadly used. It was, I think, the biggest game development community of its time, and that was Unity for a chapter after that. And I've been doing work with people in free-to-play gaming for quite a long time, and really what led me to blockchain was working with these teams that are running very, very deep game economies and trying to manage them and figuring out as the rewards of succeeding in global free-to-play market for games, have just ballooned. The price of entry's gone up, marketing costs have gone up, and as a kind of natural consequence of that, the depth of these game economies, if they're going to succeed without a just incredibly outsized audience adopting them, it imposes really, really difficult challenges on these teams that are designing the economies from the start, trying to adjust them and operate them in real time. And so that angle is the kind of primary lens that I was looking at blockchain to for solutions, because operating markets inside of games is really, really difficult. Getting price signals of any kind, or even liquidity signals of any kind, back from what's happening in game economies is really, really difficult. So part of our thesis is that game economies at today's depth and even much deeper will actually run much better and more efficiently, and in a way that players and publishers appreciate, because it's going to make their lives easier too. They'll operate better thanks to running on better infrastructure for these markets.
So my background is I was an engineer at Pinterest back in 2013, and then I later worked at a company called Credit Karma in Silicon Valley, so sort of a traditional engineering background. Fell down the crypto rabbit hole in 2017, and really was more interested in the application layer. So a project like CryptoKitties was kind of an interesting experiment in that space that motivated me and my co-founder to explore building things directly on Ethereum. And I think CryptoKitties at that time was the first app that really tried to just get Ethereum into the hands of regular users. So that was interesting to us. And then the idea for OpenSea was, there's going to be a lot of digital assets like CryptoKitties and even outside of gaming. So you can think about the design space for digital assets is pretty wide. It includes things like tickets, domain names, game items, even physical assets. And so our idea was, could you build sort of an eBay-style marketplace for digital assets as opposed to physical ones? So that was kind of where OpenSea came about.
So prior to the crypto scene, I was a fine artist and gallery director, and then started becoming more involved in the creative technology space at the same time as being interested in mining and crypto mining and what was happening with these distributed ledgers. And so in that thought process, I started then playing with Bitcoin in creative ways and working with other creatives that were in the space. We established a genre called crypto puzzles, which was basically art pieces that hid cryptocurrency within them. And so all someone had to do was have the skill set of solving the puzzle that was presented to them, and they could withdraw the Bitcoin from the private key. So from that, though, we saw it was viral, like instantly. It became one of the largest threads on Bitcoin Talk within a month. So we felt like, okay, what did we just do? And wanted to keep exploring that idea. So we were then contracted to do more educational and interactive applications to teach people about cryptocurrencies and other projects. We worked on something called deCred and taught people about proof of stake, proof of work, hybrid mining, just that whole experience down the rabbit hole of what is cryptocurrency. But realized quickly that what we really wanted to do was remove all of the blockchain friction and create the free-to-play user experience that like gamers love and all of us love, and not that you have this paywall of Bitcoin or Ethereum right when you start the application. So how do you design for that? And we launched the Blockade Games basically in the beginning of January 2018 to explore how would we design the sort of platform to support the application that we would want to interact with. And that's how we started out with our journey with Neon District. And so now we've gotten that far, and you can, even today, we started a sale in which you can onboard with cash via Square, buy an in-game currency, and then start purchasing NFTs, which are game assets, which will then be supported within our gaming platform, Neon District, when it launches this December.
Cool. And also wanted to ask the question about gameplays. Like we tried in our office a couple different Ethereum games, and they kind of like line up almost to like more like gambling audience as opposed to games. So I was wondering, like, so how do we combine like compelling gameplays with this new kind of primitive that blockchain brings to the table, like economic side of it? So how do you balance those two? And I mean, if to the extent you have an opinion on that, feel free to.
Sure. So I think if anything's been shown with the games thus far on Ethereum specifically and other chains, it's that blockchain developers should not create games, at least in my opinion, because they are not game developers. They are blockchain developers, and that's where they should stay. And so really the ethos of my company is, we're blockchain developers, we're tech nerds, we do the blockchain stuff, let the gamers do the gaming stuff, and we meet in the middle to create games powered by blockchain technology. And so I really think the key from that is not telling crypto developers they need to make better games. It's that we should be telling the developers that are already creating great games, hey, this is a better technology to run on.
I think that coming from a game development marketing standpoint and a game publishing standpoint, back in the days when we're looking at games, our primary metrics of why you want to publish a game would be how are the developers? Are they able to actually make the game as a service so that they can continue on supporting the game? And that is the whole ethos of game publishing in general, is that the game should be fun, but at the same time, I guess a bigger factor is the game should make money, which somewhat takes away the fun when it becomes a whole chunk of like extremely free to play with a lot of like paywalls and people paying for microtransactions every single time. Now, if you move on to blockchain in general and how games are applied, you have two schools of thoughts, right? You have blockchain games that are specifically focused on the blockchain element of it, incorporating game styles into it. And on the other hand, there are games that are basically a free-to-play game, for example, or any kind of game, for that matter, that utilizes a certain aspect of the blockchain without necessarily compromising how the game is played or how the experience is experienced, right? And so I think that there's no hard and fast rule in terms of how do you create a game that's basically catering for a certain segment of the market, because anyone in crypto, for example, would already understand how to onboard themselves into a game. Like if you're a crypto person who understands cryptocurrency, and then suddenly you felt the urge to play a blockchain game, you kind of understand exactly how the flow of onboarding yourself into it. But as a regular person who doesn't know anything about crypto, that's going to be a problem because you don't know about cryptocurrency. You don't know about wallets and like how to onboard yourself into it. So that's where other game developers are trying to figure out how do we create an experience where we don't necessarily have to deal with the blockchain just yet, and then slowly educate them while they're playing the game, while they're already emotionally invested into the game, where they've purchased items that are somewhat centralized still at that time, and say, maybe we could go ahead and educate you further into how do you bring these items back to the blockchain. So I think that, like these are things to consider, and that at this point I'm seeing that any kind of approach, as long as like a group of people or a subset of people is actually experiencing it positively, it should be explored.
Thanks. So maybe the issue here is what's a blockchain game actually. So a blockchain game, this is not like a fixed rule, but it's not a collectible. So CryptoKitties, so it's not a game. Maybe you can build games around owning CryptoKitties and doing things with CryptoKitties. But CryptoKitties per se, it's not a game. A game also is not something centralized that only uses on-chain assets as well. That's not like a blockchain game, like for me at least. So also, like if you want to onboard non-crypto users or whatever into your game, you don't want them to experience like a paywall right at the first point. So for example, if you want to play a card game and the first thing you are asked is to buy a card pack, that's maybe $10, you will be better off just like buying Magic the Gathering card packs and having the real asset in your hand. But the thing is, for crypto games, it's really hard to onboard or to have like an audience or new users because the technology is not there yet. So if you want to have like a game that has 1 million players, you will not be able to do that right now, decentralized. We still on Crypto Wars are pretty centralized on almost everything we do. Like for example, running on tournaments, we are the only ones hosting tournaments right now. The main idea is to allow players to host their own tournaments in the future, and having a more decentralized experience on the gameplay. Like for everyone, also allow users to mod the game, to create new game features, to like edit everything about the game they want. But also, like the key is to have like everything thought about like from day one. So when we first started developing Crypto Wars, we thought about like doing this as much as decentralized as possible on the future. Obviously, like at first, we knew it was going to be impossible, and like having a lot of crypto tool sets like for game developers, it's also hard. We tried to do that like with regular gaming studios back in Buenos Aires, and the hard part was to make them understand how blockchain works, and what things can you do and can't, like things that you cannot do on blockchain. Like obviously you can just like create a pre-sale or of whatever, a token NFT, or just like run a marketplace, but that's not something that's actually, for me at least, a crypto game.
Yeah. We spent a lot of time thinking about this because we talk with people who've been building games for a long time without the benefit of running markets on this kind of infrastructure. And to be frank, most of the games industry is not thinking about blockchain. They're thinking about running virtual economies and wanting to figure out how to run them in an efficient way and in a way that offers more freedom than you have now. And so we kind of think about this more like you've already got a $150 billion industry driven by very, very deep economies with tens of millions of players participating in them, but it's run by one merchant. And that one merchant has to figure out how to price everything, when to make adjustments in response to players as very, very unpredictable agents that are really good at finding exploits. And just taking some of that complexity off the table by allowing parties to transact with each other in a way that's trust minimized is really a huge boon compared to the way these economies are run right now. So we think it'll start small. It's also, we think it offers big benefits, but there'll also be a learning curve. And this is just to say that there's been a lot of really interesting experiments run on public chains, and a lot of people trying to figure out how to bring those benefits to the kinds of products that the game industry broadly, game players expect. But I don't think that players or game publishers broadly are really ever going to care that much about what kind of infrastructure they built on. Just want to know it works. And if it works in supporting trust minimized transactions in a way that it doesn't impose big middleman costs on them, and is just more efficient for running deep complex game economies, they're going to be on board. So we try not to get too hung up on the natural evolution I think we're seeing of. You've got games that just live entirely in smart contracts that are primarily oriented around gambling-like mechanics, and then you've got hybrid models where the game is still running in a sort of totally centralized way. You have no guarantee that what the game has to offer is still going to be available just because you're holding an NFT in your wallet. We want to instead think about what game players are drawn to right now, and what they want and can't have that the publishers also agree with, which is more liquid, freer markets. And so that's kind of the way we think about it.
Yeah, I would agree with most of that. I think the sort of low-hanging fruit is the idea of transitioning from a closed economy with lots of management overhead to an open economy. I guess the layer on top of that I would add is that I think blockchains at their core are really like coordination tools, right? So they allow, what we're seeing in the early experimental Ethereum space, they allow lots of different parties to all coordinate really well with each other. So examples of this include launching an NFT, and the coordination of a third-party marketplace is now taken care of. You have this instant way to trade the assets. So I think the idea of looking at what gamers want right now, which is more freedom, more ability to trade, and that aligns with publishers. I think that's an interesting lens, but I think an unexplored lens is like, what other things does that design space really open up? Like, what other sort of coordination mechanisms might make games interesting that maybe there is no demand from players at the moment, but they turn out to be like really weird and cool stuff that just kind of comes up organically. And I think that's where the experimental side of what's going on with Ethereum right now could turn out to be more interesting, or it could not. And the sort of evolution of this might be a little more top-down, existing games or existing game developers layering on blockchain in kind of an opaque way to the user. But that's what I would say.
So I feel like a lot of the games we've seen so far that use blockchain have taken unabashedly this model to sell power. Like assets are, this is a pay-to-win game, and we're not really ashamed of it. That, I think, model will die as soon as we really start rolling out games that use real strategy and skill for players to create value over a long period of time, because once you have a pay-to-win model, it just destroys the fun. You're not going to attract any real gamers. Like, why would someone want to buy a deck of cards that are more expensive than Hearthstone to go play a game where they're only going to get crushed by someone that had more money than them? I mean, there's no fun in that. So Neon District has made a real attempt to produce a wide design space, which gives the opportunity for every asset to have a very specific role in a situation, so that it's more strategy involved in even the PvP mode of the game. So I think, in my mind, really tapping into that puzzle-solving skill set that I've always been attracted to when it came to the crypto space, and using the human brain as the real tool to derive the value and to abstract it from the opportunity is where I feel like this is going to shine and be different than traditional gaming.
And so then, quick question on also the audience. So do you think it will start with like mid-core gamers or hardcore gamers, or it will be casual gamers that will be early adopters of blockchain games?
So I guess with Neon District, since we don't have any blockchain friction to start, we're just targeting the general RPG card player market right to start. So that's why we're on Steam, and that's where we're marketing to those individuals. I really don't think that, yes, you're gonna have your hardcore fans. I think definitely your hardcore people that really appreciate the lore and the fiction and the collectible nature of what is even the art assets, because the art assets are huge here. Just like with Magic the Gathering cards, those fans love the story, the art, everything about the card and the collectability of it, which edition, which artist made it. That's all going to factor into these same digital assets. Neon District was invited to, or Blockade Games was invited to the Tate Modern Museum of Art to do an exhibition on basically how we are, with blockchain technology, bridging the gap between why gaming and gaming art can be considered the same as, in every capacity, traditional art. Same, you can invest in it the same, you can collect it the same, and so that's new. And I've always appreciated game art, and I've always been sad that it's never had the respect in the fine art world. And so I think we're at the precipice of, this is not just blockchain gaming, we're gonna be challenging multiple industries about what we're doing with this technology.
Yeah, I'd put my money on hardcore gamers just because I guess what we're seeing in the early space is these are folks who are like treating these as investments and treating these as things they want to put their time into and grow the value of it. I mean, I think in some ways like the jury is out on a lot of this stuff. Like we really don't know what's going to happen. But if we look at like the Gods Unchained launch, they're really targeting streamers and people who are coming over from Hearthstone. And I think what we're seeing is that these are folks who are like willing to dig in a little bit and try something completely new as opposed to someone who's like playing Flappy Bird or something like that. But could be totally wrong.
These terms are, I'm not even sure they're really well defined. When we think about, when I think about mid-core versus core, I really think about systems depth, the expected time that you might invest in, like up to years in a game, and less about how brutally competitive you want the gameplay to be, or how much practice you might have to put in to feel like you're an interesting participant in the game. Through that lens, I think the core end of the game player spectrum makes a lot more sense as early adopters of this. One, because the economies are better suited to marketplace-like activity, and they already have sufficient systems depth where if you want to do anything beyond pure collectible economy in blockchain, then you should really be looking at MMO-like designs rather than very very shallow games that may have multiple soft currencies, but they're not actually important to making progress and investing in the game for the long term. So hopefully that evolves toward mid-core and eventually becomes part of all games. But I think that's where it'll start.
And I think to echo something Brett was saying about just the defined terms, specifically, blockchain gaming, I think that term is a little bit of a misnomer. We don't really call Google a database search company, just the same way we wouldn't call a game a database game or a blockchain game. I think these are just all games, and I think if you take a look from that perspective and really see how blockchain technology itself should enable games, not be the reason why people are playing games. It really should be something that any player from a hardcore gamer to just a regular gamer should be able to benefit from. I think there are levels of engagement, obviously, with games that are running on top of blockchain technology, how much control you want of your assets. And I think from that perspective, that a gamer who, does this all day, every day, probably a streamer type, would go down that rabbit hole a bit more than the normal gamer who's just playing for a good experience.
I kind of echo the sentiments of pretty much all of you guys. I think that I'm going to flip-flop here a little bit in terms of where it's going to be. Just because if you talk about hardcore game or mid-core game or even casual games or hyper-casual games, these games are built differently from each other. If you're looking at NFTs, for example, these are digital collectibles. And in some cases, it's actually a financial instrument in the form of whatever it is. A sword, a character. It is a financial instrument if you think about it on in a speculative manner. And that applies in a way to certain circumstances, kinds of games that are leaning towards the mid-core to the hardcore side of things, where we have deeper item economies, where you can actually apply NFTs to it. An MMO, for example, is one thing, where you could go ahead and put in different types of non-fungible tokens into the game and make it as the core value proposition of the entire game economy. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, if you move on to a Candy Crush kind of game, I don't think you need an NFT Candy Crush. It doesn't make sense, right? It's basically Flappy Bird, for example. These casual games would not merit any sort of NFT application on the blockchain side. So what we're thinking is that, like, say, for example, with what we're trying to do with Outplay that game, is that we enable another layer of monetization that game developers can allow themselves to experience. Now, if you're playing who among you here plays casual games? Or like, I don't know, like hyper casual games? Okay, only a few, right? But I mean, who among you loves ads on these games? Nobody? Right. Well, if you're playing a casual game, as a game developer, that's my only source of revenue. Because in-app purchase for casual games and hyper-casual games is non-existent. I mean, it exists, you can buy it, but it doesn't poise any value to you because it's mostly consumable. Like you buy time or you buy life, right? And so the audience is different. It's more of a casual player. Right now, we're looking at about more than 100 million casual gamers out there. And most of the casual gamers eventually evolve into mid-core gamers or hardcore gamers, at least on mobile. And the reason why I'm saying this is that if you enable another part of the blockchain with a casual game versus the NFT part of the blockchain with mid-core or hardcore games, then you allow yourself to create another type of value for game developers and for players. So what we're trying to do, for example, is that as a game developer, I now have the choice to put ads in my game because that's how I'm going to earn money, but it will probably annoy my customers because ads are annoying. But at the same time, if I add a tournament level into it, then it changes the whole dynamics of how a casual player plays the game. Maybe I challenge Dimitri and say, hey, why don't we do a PvP and let's see who wins? Or why don't we go ahead and join a tournament pool where a slew of 10, 20, 30, or 100 people will compete for a prize. So the motivation here is now sort of like a financial game on the crypto side of things, especially if the payout is in crypto. So I'd say that the adoption would happen both ways, depending on what kind of implementation you're putting in on the game itself.
Yeah, totally agree. So blockchain, like for us, it's a database, but it's also like a brand new like piece of technology that you need to understand and how to leverage it for the company and for the users. For example, yeah, you can run tournaments like on your hyper casual game and take a small percentage of the fee or the winnings for the company as well. You can even like just like mint or whatever some sort of token for that and allow users to freely trade that on an open market or buy lives or time or whatever with that as well. And you can also mint a small percentage to the company. The thing is, like we are trying to, like most of the companies are trying to bring like these like proven games into the blockchain space, like just taking like a few parts and putting them on distributed ledger technology. But the cool part, and I think the most interesting at least, is like these kind of new ways of thinking about how to monetize or how to create a fun game that could be both profitable for the users and for the company as well, especially for those users that spend like a huge amount of time playing the game that right now are just like losing money and time, or like at least they are having fun, but that's like not most of the cases. So yeah, that's basically it. And I think we should see that like right now there are a lot of games that have this like kind of hardcore investors, not so much players, like these whales that will buy a lot of assets or whatever just like as a mean of investment to see if they make easy money. Like that's a way right now. Like most of the crypto games are making money, but we are not there yet on a stage of development where we have like at least one proven game that works and it's making revenue, like constant revenue, and it's growing like a steady pace. We don't have that, so it's really easy just to say, okay, yeah, casual gamers or mid-core or hardcore gamers. It depends on the game that is going to be built. Like if you are going to be built like a massive MMO, like EVE Online style, yeah, you will be targeting EVE Online players that are pretty hardcore. If you are building Candy Crush Tournament Saga, yeah, you will be targeting casual gamers. That's mainly it.
Cool. And to keep it interactive, we'll open up for questions. Do you have one potentially, since you're writing the article, or?
Yeah, maybe one. Yeah, it's kind of been stuck in my head from the beginning because you had mentioned that what a blockchain game is not is a centralized service that uses, a blockchain just to keep on-chain assets. But when thinking about kind of casual, or rather more traditional game, I guess, publishers, to me that actually sounds like that is a more centralized service. So I'm trying to kind of marry that in my head. So how much goes on chain?
Yeah, it's only what needs to, I think, is the correct answer, and that's in part just for practical purposes and the way that, like, the maturity of tooling that these kinds of long-lived games are built on is the blockchain ecosystem doesn't yet offer anything quite as polished and proven in the market. So it feels, I think to most game developers, feels like a considerable risk to run even some portion of your game economy on this new type of database that supports peer-to-peer transactions in a way that you might not even be able to censor depending on how you implement it. That's it's a really different paradigm. I would expect the game industry at large to warm up to it slowly and build on successes in a similar way that we saw in like the early and mid 2000s. The industry really adopt and experiment and then really succeed with free to play. And free to play is kind of in this the status quo, whether it's equilibrium or not, I'm not sure, but the status quo is, I'm not sure anybody's happy with it. Definitely not the people building and operating these games. So you guys, there's a lot of talk about pay to win in these deep economies, and people are just coming in and kind of plowing through all the game has to offer because they have money to spend. That for better or worse, that is most of the game industry's revenue, and that is what's driven most of its growth from $30 to $150 billion in the last decade, roughly. So making these economies function in a healthier way, in a way that's easier for game publishers to manage, hopefully will change that dynamic a little bit for the better. But you're not going to convince large publishers with multi-million-dollar, tens of millions of dollars in their game budgets to build on this infrastructure if they have to do significant portions of computation or data storage on it. They're gonna want to minimize their exposure to this because it's new. I think down to the whatever is required for the assets to be marketable, meaning they don't, and that could be they run the market, right? They do all the market making. They figure out adjustments, which there are some traditional game publishers that are doing that right now. But I think the early promise of blockchain is being able to run those markets in a way that imposes less cost and burden and offers just a better participant experience than some of these either explicitly endorsed and centrally run markets for game assets, or in like traditional games like Diablo Auction House kind of stuff, or the secondary markets, which are actually much bigger than these game economies in some cases, and rife with all sorts of activity that publishers sometimes want distance from and have a difficult time managing, and would prefer players don't participate in because the experience might not be good. You might get ripped off, or you might just not get what you think you're going to get. So, yeah, I would say only as much as keeps the assets that players care about marketable.
Do all nodes on the Ethereum network compute the state transitions for a Crypto Wars game? Mm-hmm. Are they storing the state for all of the items that are on Crypto Wars? Because that sounds like a different kind of a...
Well, I would say, what about the computation? What about the game simulation itself? And maybe that for some games that you can bake almost all the functionality in the client and verify the client in a way that kind of keeps things safe and keeps the playing field level. But for the most part, you're going to have to centralize some part of that function if you want to coordinate what games do today across a large player base.
Yeah, sure. Just to add on that, for Crypto Wars, we the entire game runs on smart contracts. We have like maybe 30 smart contracts that does like everything in the game. So every action you take, it's a transaction. Right now we are running on Loom, so it's free for us, it's free for the users. It's not going to be in the future, so we are looking at other technologies or like services that will help to mitigate these issues of having to pay, basically. But also there is another big issue that, for example, for us, we don't need to keep the entire like history of every tournament we run. So it doesn't make sense to have that on a single blockchain. So we are looking like at different solutions that will allow us to have disposable blockchains that will just like finalize, and then we will check the state on mainnet or on whatever, and if it's okay, then we just like throw everything on the garbage and just like keep the final state. But yeah, obviously it depends on the game. You're not going to be able to run an FPS on the blockchain, maybe in the future or whatever, or maybe with like some sort of technology that will allow you to do that, but no as right now. But yeah, obviously it's a big design challenge as well when you're building games. That's why I was telling about like if you want to build like a really decentralized game in a way, you need to think about it like from day one, because you have a lot of of stones in the road. Like for example, I don't know, it's a mess. But yeah,
I'd be curious to hear everyone's thoughts on why decentralized games at all. Like what is the kind of irreducible value to players?
Yeah. So for us, it's not about like having like, obviously you have like all this having ownership, having transparency, and all this kind of stuff that comes like with I don't know, an ERC20 as well. Like it's not even a game. But for us, it's more about, for example, right now we are trying to have this way, like to allow players to run their tournaments, to mod the game, and to do that without like even our permission, and to make money out of that. And for example, it comes like hand by hand of giving away a little bit of control on your product as well. That's
You could have an open source license to your game code, and and if somebody wants to close it up on a fork or do something else with it, you could have a licensing fee.
Yeah. Yeah, for example, I don't know if you played like Warcraft 3, so you have like all these like mods like just popping up because you have like the map editor, like Dota came out of that. But most of those creators didn't even make like 1 cent, and you obviously play like a lot of times those kind of games. Riot made a lot of money, yeah. Some of them did, but like probably like the people, like the person who thought about it didn't make like a cent out of that, or like just spend like hours building that. I built a lot of mods for like Counter-Strike at the time, and I never got like a cent. I just did that out of like love for the art, love for the game.
Yeah, and I think it'd be awesome if publishers had a way to sort of programmatically reward people for doing that sort of thing in a way that didn't require them to kind of like, middleman some value.
Exactly, yeah. That's the way. Like what we're trying to do is to remove ourselves as the middleman from that equation. That's why, at least for us right now, we thought about the game to be like as decentralized as possible. Decentralization is a weird word. Like it's like a complex thing that doesn't even make sense sometimes, like to include it, but it's like kind of a fancy word, so you throw it out. But yeah, that's what we are trying to build, at least right now.
So let's say I'm a game developer, and if I'm indie game developer, I don't have a large budget to build all the marketplaces, and it makes sense to go to blockchain. But let's say it's a startup of 10 people, and we actually have people who build in marketplaces. Why would we give control over the currencies, economy, and entire marketplace towards a blockchain? Like, why would I go to a blockchain? Yeah, like if I, let's say, just give out control of the assets to peer-to-peer economy, there's always can be a third-party marketplace that removes my developer cut out of every transaction. So this happened to like even traditional centralized ways, but they ban it. Like World of Warcraft, Diablo 3, always exists a market that doesn't have the fee enforced by the developer.
Apart from tapping into the blockchain ecosystem, obviously you get some things out of the box. But what if those out-of-the-box things have no value to you? Meaning, you have the wherewithal to build your own marketplace. You have the wherewithal to, write your own logic, write a game explorer, whatever. Frankly, I don't think the blockchain has much value for you in that case. And I think that is a valid answer that I think we shy away from as an industry. Like, oh, blockchain's amazing. It's got to help everybody. Blockchain doesn't have to help everybody. It's going to help some people more than others. That's just the honest use case. And so I think for what you say and for the specific game developer you may be describing, blockchain has a lot less use than someone who can't build a marketplace for themselves.
So the overall digital assets that were sold last year, like game assets, was something like $22 billion revenue across the industry, whereas the collectible market was $200 billion. So alone, that's just like, there's money on the table for people to invest in game assets. 22 digital assets sold across the game industry, just collectible assets.
Oh, I think it's a lot more than that.
Pretty sure it was 22 billion. I mean, you could correct me.
I mean, I don't know the exact figure. It's like just virtual goods, but like.
Well, Fortnite made 2.5 billion in revenue, so not.
Yeah, and that's entirely in-app purchases, right? Of V-Bucks for the Fortnite economy.
Right. So I mean, our numbers that we pulled were like 22. I mean, maybe they're wrong, but it's a large number. But I'm saying the collectible market is much larger just on its own, and so this is the first time that we're providing the opportunity for players to bridge into the actual collectible market with their game assets and their investments. And so when we argue why blockchain for gaming, I mean, how many of us have like drowned hours into games and walked away with no investment other than it was entertainment? So that and alone is just solving a pain point for gamers.
I'll add a little twist on that. So I would echo Canaan's point that this isn't going to make sense for all games, and I think that's why we're seeing so much activity in the really small, even one-person projects doing really interesting stuff. But I think the question to ask is sort of, is there anything you get from the coordination of a blockchain from building on it, right? And the answer to that question is, at the moment, like sometimes, right? Sometimes it can be useful to get to coordinate with an external marketplace. And I guess what the layer on top of that I would add is it doesn't necessarily mean you don't get to monetize some of these pieces of coordination. So in the case of OpenSea, for example, anytime you trade an asset on OpenSea, we give the developer of the project a cut. So we want to make this symbiotic relationship between the OpenSea marketplace and the developer's assets. So I wouldn't necessarily say that like the trade-off is always like giving up control and losing revenue. It's just, is there a piece of this ecosystem that it would be valuable to coordinate with, and can you monetize that appropriately? The answer as Ken said, like the answer for most bigger game companies is probably no, but for the smaller ones, sometimes it's yes, and they do really interesting stuff. So.
To follow up on this, it's kind of ethical problem. As a user on OpenSea, like, let's say there's existed another marketplace that doesn't have a developer fee. As a user, would I actually go to the marketplace and buy cheaper, or potentially earning more revenue for myself for selling an item, or actually I care about developer to?
So it's the same reason you go to eBay instead of some random like free eBay. When eBay started, there was a free eBay, and because eBay had bleed over between the different categories on their site. I'm not saying that necessarily it'll always be OpenSea, but you go to the marketplace where there's the most buyers, right? And if you're selling something, you're going to go where you think you can get sold, and if there's a fee on that, that's, you'd rather have it sold than go somewhere where it's free, right?
I actually would disagree with this because like blockchain actually eliminates the reason to go to eBay.
You still have to find a buyer though.
Yes, I agree with the market, but if there's a cheaper market, people will potentially go there unless it's an ethical problem. Because blockchain eliminates the trust requirement that eBay has to incorporate for protection to the seller and like a buyer.
What you're saying is like having some ability to coordinate buyers and sellers is that is valuable, and there's some trade-off with Are you taking the most convenient, best market, biggest market, or are you willing to trade some convenience and like cast a super wide net?
I'll give you an example from what we've seen. So CryptoKitties has a 3.5% fee on our marketplace, on their marketplace. We had a 0% fee for a very long time, and we have a very small portion of CryptoKitties sales go through OpenSea despite having no fee on them, right? And that's just because CryptoKitties has its own marketplace. People go there, they buy cats, that's where new users come. It's the default place. So I think there's a lot of power in defaults.
Yeah, I would add in addition, don't discount the value of a user base. There's a reason the biggest companies in the world still sell on Amazon, right? They have the wherewithal to build their own marketplace. They have the wherewithal to build their own site. They have the wherewithal to open their own store, but there's a reason they're on Amazon, just like there's reasons for games to sell on OpenSea, right? Because they have the traffic, and don't discount the value of traffic to a website. Sure, using the Freebay example, maybe everyone will sell on OpenSea too with a 0% fee, but the percentage of people who will do that is so minimal that it's, it doesn't matter. I agree, that problem will always exist, and it's not specific to the crypto industry by any means. But that's just something we have to live with, and we have to provide value on top, through a user experience, for example, that the user is willing to pay that fee for. Just like people still trade on Coinbase and Binance rather than a decentralized exchange. You can make that, argument anytime.
But it's only possible because Amazon provides a centralized protection that's required for this, so it's more convenient. On a blockchain where everything is public, I can clone entire database of OpenSea, provide it for free, so I have a same market. But for the user, they actually don't feel a difference, but they get everything cheaper by like developer fee.
You're right, but let's take that case into example, and OpenSea can defend itself, but I'll just play with it. How are you going to get people to go to your website, right? That's going to cost money. Where's that money going to come from? Oh, you're going to have to charge a fee to get that money to advertise. Oh, then we're back stuck in the same cycle, right? It is a vicious positive reinforcing cycle that, sure, you can just copy it and make it a 0% fee. You're going to be the only guy that knows about it. If you want people to know about it, you got to pay for ad space. If you want to pay for ad space, you need money. The way to make money is through fees. And so that cycle is something you're going to have to contend with. And sure, maybe then you only charge a 1% fee, whatever. But that's just something I'll note from that perspective. It's not just like you make another website, everybody knows about it.
Yeah, sorry, just to add maybe a quick, it depends on your user base actually. Like you will have these kind of hardcore users that are really, first of all, maybe they just have privacy issues and they want to go like through the darkest site possible just to not get tracked on what they are buying or whatever. And you have these other users that will expect to pay the least possible amount of money, even if they have to go through a cloned OpenSea site or whatever. But for example, most of your user base will just don't give a fuck and just go to OpenSea and buy that.
So I can say from the developer side, I think one of the biggest attractions to OpenSea has been the support they provide for both customers and then also developers. So they attract people that are like, hey, I want to have a crowd sale. How do I do that? OpenSea has the developer team that comes and helps and does free work to make that sale happen. And that's just really hard to compete with when they bring the sale to their marketplace, and then they have their user base, which is undeniably the biggest in the marketplace space. So I have seen firsthand the effect, the network effect that they're building for themselves.
Thanks so much. I guess the one thing I would add is just it's a lot of these debates in startups and crypto generally are the difference between theory and practice, right? So theoretically, right, if you look at exchanges, there's I guess in the centralized exchange world, there's liquidity moats. In the decentralized exchange world, there's less of a liquidity moat, right? As you mentioned, you could clone the entire order book and recreate the site. But in practice, actually getting your company off the ground, the sort of social capital, the brand, all of these sort of soft moats, I think in my opinion, will make marketplaces interesting businesses that won't just sort of like compete each other to death or something like that, right? So I guess that's what I would say is like, no one really knows how it'll play out, but I think we are seeing these like soft effects of like user bases, SEO, like all of those things that go into making a company interesting, right?
Hi, is any one of you building on top of Lightning Network?
So we have Lightning in our tech stack, not like you guys do, where you guys use Lightning as part of the like, do you use smart contracts with Lightning?
Yeah, something similar.
Yeah, so that's what we did. We were exploring the payment channel of using Lightning to mint NFTs, which the downside that I've seen with this, and you can challenge me if I'm wrong, but I have a theory that users don't want to spend their crypto because it's so hard for them to accumulate it, and it's almost like their little nest egg. So the last thing they want to do is use that as the payment channel. That's what I've seen. So when we did our experiment of how many people would onboard with cash versus how many people would interact with the Lightning Network, I think we had 2 people even try the Lightning Network integration, which is super sad for us. We did get great articles out of it, but as far as users and what they want, it was pretty disappointing.
So yeah, my question is actually more directed towards Devin, because I actually find the open marketplace is really interesting. So one, back in the day, I guess Rarebits was kind of your big competitor. I'm wondering how you guys have differentiated yourselves and how your performance has gone compared to Rarebits, and maybe the reasons why. The other one would be, in your time at OpenSea, a lot of game developers have come and put their assets on your marketplace. I'm wondering if you've seen or learned any lessons that are interesting that you'd like to share with us, like what game companies have done well, why companies that have done, for example, like item pre-sales versus companies that haven't, what worked well in your opinion, just kind of any interesting things that you've seen.
Yeah, so regarding the first question around Rarebits, for context, there was a marketplace that was pretty much identical to OpenSea, launched a couple weeks after we launched. There was a lot of head-to-head. I think we did our product hunt launch in the same exact hour. And it was very awkward. Like, we'd go to conferences together and, like, say hi to each other. But it's such a small space that you don't really want to be in a place where you're, like, really, like, competing with someone. You really want to be working together, right? And so we had some talks with them, to try to smooth things out and whatnot. But, yeah, for whatever reason, Rarebits has decided to take a very different approach than ours. So in some ways, we've stayed the course. Like, we've been very devoted to the blockchain gaming ecosystem as it is right now, which is primarily on Ethereum, with some activity on the other chains. And Rarebits, I'm not exactly sure what they're up to, but I know that they're still working in the collectible space, but going after bigger IP and developing some sort of more centralized products while the blockchain space matures, which could be a very valid approach to navigating the space. And so from like the perspective of if you look at the 2 marketplaces, I think we're pretty much 99-point-something% of the open marketplace volume. And then in terms of what's been interesting, I mean, a lot of this has been covered in some of the questions, but I think what we've seen as effective on OpenSea is real gameplay. So products that have a usually centralized game. To Brett's point, like I think the projects that just use the ledger as asset ownership and then have compelling gameplay somewhere else have been relatively effective. The bridge between the Ethereum chain and the off-chain game is very clunky at the moment, which I think is sort of an opportunity, right? I was trying to use this. There's a game called Epics on our platform, and they're the first esports card game, and they have a great app, like a lot of features, a lot of really interesting pack opening mechanics, all this stuff around rarity and crafting cards together, things like that, and getting them onto the chain is incredibly hard. And yet people still do it, right? People are motivated enough to sell for real ETH because you can only sell in the in-game currency, which is completely centralized in their game, that they're like willing to go through that process of going and putting them on OpenSea. And it exposes exposes people to that new technology, exposes the OpenSea user base to that game. So there's this kind of interesting symbiosis. So those types of games are doing really well. Neon District recently held a really successful pre-sale where they had interesting like loot box mechanics that maybe you could go and build yourself, but having an open marketplace and just bootstrapping off of what OpenSea has built has been really helpful. So I would say, yeah, it's starting to mature. There's still tons of activity in the blockchain gaming space, even though it's not as like talked about in the crypto Twitter sphere, right?
So one of the interesting features of blockchains is effectively the fact that there's continuity. And we've also kind of started to identify that attention is something that is intrinsically valuable for gamers. So the things that they gain in game, they're attached to. And there's some kind of value there. So I'm curious to know everyone's thoughts on the asynchronous NFTs and how they plan to potentially bring them to market or leverage that technology. Asynchronous meaning something that could be a flaming sword in one game that could then become, let's say, a flaming car skin in a racing game. So liquidity for an NFT across different game platforms.
So this is a fun concept. Almost a year ago, I did like kind of an NFT integration smart contract to be able to do that, like to be able to, for example, post the NFT ID on a smart contract and an EPFS address, depending on which contract is going to use that NFT, and that will give you like a decentralized way to see what your asset does in all the games. It's pretty cool. Like interoperability right now, like even on Ethereum mainnet is growing like crazy, especially with DeFi. Like there were a few talks about this on DevCon that were pretty interesting. It's probably going to get there. The main issue is who mints the token and how do you like make sure you're not getting fucked as a game developer, especially if that token does something that affects gameplay. If it's only aesthetic or whatever, yeah, you don't actually care. You just like put like an image on your site and you're practically done. But yeah, it's pretty interesting, and we probably are going to see that a lot in future games. Yeah.
I guess I just want to quickly add to that though, because back when we were trying to build Alto last year, one of the things that we're building was an NFT maker platform. And one of the things that within the gaming space in general, within blockchain gaming space that we were talking about, we were so high on item interoperability, for example. Although I do know for a fact that that's far off in the future in terms of like how practical the usage will be at some point. But you're right, people have this level of attachment to whatever it is that they own. And so as we move along into understanding exactly how these assets work, right now, if you mention a sword in one game and a flaming car in another, it is going to be very weird for me to look at it and say, this is actually the asset that I got attached with. And at the same time, as a game developer, there's always this context of, do I allow these assets in my game? Or do I want these assets in my game? And so it is a work in progress. I don't think that this is something that we will be looking into like this year or even like early next year, because there has to have some level of maturity that has to take in place. Because right now, like we're really on the early stages of like how we can deal with this. I mean, like right now we were talking about like interoperability as a feature. It is a feature for the future, but the thing is like we don't know when it's really going to happen to a point where the integration is seamless, where as a game developer, it makes sense for me to allow these items to exist in my ecosystem. Like some people are saying, okay, well, if a CryptoKitty, there's a lot of owners of CryptoKitties, and I could just go ahead and say, I accept all the CryptoKitties in my game and turn them into something, maybe like a 3D cat of some sort, right? And you say, okay, that's instant user acquisition, right? Because it's permissionless, and you're allowed to actually just bring it over to your game. But right now, I'm not seeing a lot of groups doing that just yet. But hopefully, I guess in the future, that could happen.
Yeah, I just want to add something to that, especially the part that the developer has. If the developer has to manually add an asset to the game, that's probably not going to happen, or like going to happen in just a few cases. But the thing is, if you just provide your game as an API that whoever wants just like can like tweak it and add whatever into the game, for example, other NFTs, other centralized assets, or whatever you can imagine, that will probably do the trick. First of all, because obviously, like if you have assets on your game that are being sold by other company, you're not making that revenue, so you're not incentivized in a way to bring that to your gameplay. Because you are giving just away money to another company. If you have like a partnership where you like have a revenue share contract or whatever, yeah, that's something that should probably work. But it's really hard to do that, and it's not as like seamless like or easy to build in your game. But yeah, it's probably to that. Like you need to open up your game to developers, and the only way it's going to work for them, like to include other open API games into your game, is that. That's mainly it.
We've been approached by some pretty big game studios that are really interested. They feel like their IP has a lot of value in it, and they just kind of want to see what would happen if they had collectible assets. So we like the idea of maybe providing a beautiful platform in which we could support these developers to experiment with a sale, a digital asset sale of, let's say, a famous character. Let's think of like a superhero, for example, that someone fully owns the IP for. They sell this asset, and now we immediately support that game character in Neon District. But in a future game, this developer could choose to support that NFT in a future title. We see this as maybe a potential fundraising model for future game developers. And so, like Neon District being the cyberpunk universe that we are, we think that we could probably support a lot of these sort of fundraisers if it was viable. So we're excited to do some R&D on that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the panel. It was very interesting and inspiring. My question is, what do you guys see as the biggest barrier for the mass adoption of blockchain technology among the game developers? Is there any difference between the big developers and indie game developers? I know you guys have already tapped a lot on that, but want a more generic answer? Like, what do you see as the most challenging part?
So the question was about indie game developers versus large-scale game developers. What are the challenges of onboarding them? Maybe in different lights, how do they see blockchain technology? I think going off a question we talked earlier that Eugene asked about, the wherewithal of these developers, really what are they tapping into the blockchain to do? Is it to tap into a marketplace? Is it just for Vogue? Is it, to appeal to some, subset of players? I would say from my experience, indie game developers are definitely more receptive to, tapping into a marketplace, for example. That's something they want to do. So far as a barrier to entry for a gamer, and I juxtapose kind of, the crypto industry against the gaming industry. Crypto gaming industry, I don't even know how many players there are, maybe about 100,000. There are 2.4 billion in the regular industry. And so from a platform perspective, if you say, onboard to my platform, you can target, 0.00001% of the market. Yes, sounds like a good proposition. Game developer is going to say, get the hell out of here. And so from that perspective, even if the blockchain does bring value to a game developer, it can't cut their market that they can target. That doesn't outweigh the benefits of a marketplace. And so from that perspective, you really have to not only target the people who gain the most value, which I think are the indies, but also provide a way for them to still target the user bases that they want to target, which is, the population, not a very, very, very small subset.
And the main issue for onboarding maybe users and also like developers, it's basically technology, and that you have to wait it out. You have to have a solid runway of cash to be able to wait maybe 1 or 2 years, because it's not coming early.
Or 3 months.
Yeah, or 3 months. But yeah, so the thing is, that's it. Yeah, we need to wait for the ecosystem to grow and to be more mature, both on the technical side and on the projects. And we obviously need like a good first game that will bring like attention of regular gamers into this space, at least.
Just want to add quickly to that one. Lately I've been playing this very interesting game from a Korean gaming company called Infinity Star. So essentially, when you onboard in that specific game, you don't necessarily have to interface with any wallet at all. You just basically play the game. You get free heroes, you get free items, and you basically play the game as if it's a centralized game. Over the course of you playing that game, there are things that shows up in terms of like how do you interface with Ethereum, or how do you onboard yourself in a wallet situation which you don't understand in the beginning. And I think like even Neon District, you guys did Plasma Bears as well. Something that's very educational, very similar, where you go into the game and your wallet is created for you. You don't necessarily have to interface with it unless you're already willing to move on further a little bit and put these items on the blockchain. With this game that I'm playing right now, it's an idle RPG, action RPG kind of game, where basically you dress up the heroes with items and weapons and accessories and all that stuff. It becomes stronger, and it just automatically moves from one stage to another until you get defeated. And I've tried to play the game at least for 1 week to 2 weeks without necessarily buying anything from OpenSea, because I want to kind of experience first if the game works without necessarily buying any other items that are in the open market. And the answer is, I bought a lot of stuff in OpenSea because, well, I kind of am impatient, and I wanted to sort of like further myself into the game. But as a player, even if without knowledge of crypto or blockchain, it was a kind of like really interesting experiment. I don't think it does anything for mass adoption, but it's a sort of model that we can take a look into at some point in the future and really understand how do we move them forward from playing a centralized game into decentralizing the items that they've earned and they've bought in the game itself.
Do you want to share Plasma Bears experience too, real quick?
Plasma Bears was a tech demo we released back in January 2019, and it was a free-to-play model of the tech stack that we were experimenting with. We had children and grandparents playing it, and it's like a Build-A-Bear. So there's like 5 NFTs that compose these bears. And as you take them on text adventures, you get more bear loot. So an arm, a head. It is actually pretty morbid, and the text adventure is also morbid. But anyways, you get these assets, and then you can upgrade your bear. And it's fun. The fun in this game, which was super simple, is people love set completion. They just love to do it. So you get different skins, and they want to match the bears and find all the right sets for the bear. And then also the rarity. So now let's say you're at maxing level, but you still want to get legendary assets, but you want them all to complete the same set. So this in and of itself has kept Plasma Bears, which we haven't done any more dev work on since like that when we released it. People are still playing it, which is actually very promising, I think, for this free-to-play blockchain model. The fact that it's that interesting just to do that part of the game.
This question is addressed towards the guys that's building on Ethereum with some sort of compute, like let's just say decentralized game logic. How do you guys think about scalability today in 2019? And if let's say in 3 months some sort of new scalability solution comes out, what would top what would top that feature list? Is it sharing mainnet security? Is it like a different type of security model? Is it decentralization? What would that how would that thought process go?
So I guess for some history, we built on Ethereum, then quickly switched to Loom, which is similar but different to Ethereum, and then are building on Near now. I'll give you the answer my customers would give you, which is we don't give a shit. As long as it runs smoothly, it's decentralized, it doesn't fail, and it runs quickly. And from my business perspective, what I would say is all of those things, plus it's cheap. So that I can either offset the cost of my customer completely or pass it through on a SaaS fee. So from that perspective, pretty dumb stuff. I mean, security model's cool, decentralization is cool. I'm not a blockchain altruist, I'm a business guy. So from that high level perspective, proof of whatever, I'll just leave it at that.
So yeah, for us it's the same. We've been with Loom since day one, and they had a lot of issues that we have to pull through. We were basically the QA for them for a few months. We are kind of still are at some points, but so yeah, we get like free stuff, but it's not enough. But the thing is, yeah, what I would say it's you need to be proven. Like it's really hard. Like we get pitched by a lot of blockchain solution companies like all the time, and most of them, one, they don't have like a public like mainnet or whatever, and even if they do, they don't have like real projects on them, most of them. So it's really hard for us just to say, okay, we are going to try your solution, because maybe it's not a lot of work to do, like to migrate everything. Like we have everything on the EVM, so it's pretty easy just like to point to another endpoint and that's it. But for our users, if we provide a shitty experience, it's going to be bad. So that's like, if we were developing crypto bars right now, we will be more open to try different stuff, because like 2 people were going to be playing the game, like, and it's probably going to be us. So it's okay. But right now that we have a lot of users, the stakes are different. Yeah.
I have more to say on this, but I'm curious, what do you think players have to gain in playing games that operate, to compute some kind of game logic on decentralized infrastructure?
Well, I work on infrastructure, so that's why that's the base.
Yeah, so it's sort of like a tool looking for a problem, right? But I think in games it's not there yet. I don't think players care where the computation for these games are being done, and I think it imposes a heavy tax and burden that's unnecessary and costly on the operators and authors of these games. Gas is a lot more expensive than AWS, and it's also a lot harder to upgrade Ethereum contracts than some traditional deployment. So I don't think it's there yet, but I think there's some interesting R&D that's probably more like 3, 4, 5 years out, where players start to develop a different relationship with some of these properties and become interested in maybe many open forks, as others have suggested, and care that they're interacting with a simulation they can know and trust, and maybe they have receipts posted that the computation was done as advertised, and there's some things to explore there that I think, again, players don't care about yet, but we may get there in a few years.
I guess I would maybe disagree with that a little bit. I think it depends what you mean by compute, right? Like ownership transfers is a compute operation, right? You're changing who owns the asset. The CryptoKitties breeding mechanic is a compute, and those are very primitive to the types of games we've been talking about, where there's on-chain ownership and off-chain gameplay. So I think improving that layer of asset ownership, makes a lot of sense for, like, we would, moving OpenSea to something like or a sidechain or a next generation protocol like Near, I think there are a lot of benefits we'd get from that, like higher throughput, potentially more interesting, beginnings of logic that people could layer on their assets, like breeding mechanics, crafting mechanics, those types of things. It doesn't have to be like running an entire TCG on the Near protocol. It can just be, giving developers a little more tools to build interesting things that don't have to be written in like Solidity, right? So I guess I would say, stepping stones towards, more interesting computations being done on chain in a scalable fashion, I think will push the space forward a bit.
So I guess the way we've designed the middleware is that we have the middleware part of the game, which is the bridge between the blockchain and then the game engine. So you can swap out the blockchain part with whatever technology blockchain network you'd want to use. We were already, Matic just made an investment in us to take, for example, the Loom network version of our game, and we can have a demo using Matic, and developers can decide which version they like better, and they can use our SDK to pick from those features. Additionally, with Near protocol, we've been talking about, well, what are the benefits of Near, and is that something we want to explore and showcase to other developers? I think that we're not like siloed into one network here, like you were suggesting. Developers are going to want to use whatever works and whatever makes the most sense for their games, and it's the cheapest, probably. And gamers are going to want to cash out their investments and get whatever assets. And so it's our job as developers to provide those payment channels for that to happen. And that doesn't rely on the network in which the game logic is interacting with.
Cool, and unless we have like last question, we have one more question. Cool.
And then the second part is, how many of you think that the big first blockchain use case in gaming will come from an existing company versus a startup company in the blockchain space?
And if we don't know? We don't know, probably. Yeah. I think, yeah. Does anybody know?
Yeah, it depends how you define big. If we're talking about like tens of millions of players, or even 5, I think it'll be traditional games industry. That's close. That's close. I mean, I think there are products out there that are more, kind of coming at games from blockchain and looking for use cases and trying to streamline onboarding that could hit that kind of number. But I would bet on the traditional industry to get there first.
Unless there's a clamor for it, I don't think they'll move into doing something, for example, that leverages on blockchain technology. I think any of these gaming companies are definitely looking into it and see if it makes sense for them. But a lot of if you talk about Riot, for example, I think it's going to be a very small subset of their R&D. But everything else still revolves around centralized games just because it works for them. And so you kind of don't want to shake things up when things are just good the way they are for them.
Why wouldn't it just come from an acquisition, right? Some blockchain game company is going to have a great tech stack, and then it's going to merge with an existing studio that has gaming figured out.
What they're playing the game on. Like, are you guys trying to optimize for like mobile, desktop? Is a blockchain-based game on the Xbox or like PlayStation even possible in the next few years?
Yeah, it's possible. It totally depends on like what you're trying to build. Like blockchain is just like an API. If you think about it that way, it's just like posting a message to like an open computer or whatever. It doesn't, like when we think about the game, like for example for us, we want it to be playable on mobile and on desktop, so that's why we build it on web. So it's a web app, super easy to port to any other, like through a native application using Ionic or whatever, like these wrappers, or even like to the PlayStation Network through a browser. It will be like a shitty experience, but you will be able to play it. But yeah, I don't think like blockchain technology will limit that. Maybe if you have like issues with like buying stuff, like especially like on the App Store, you're not going to be listed there. I'm not sure about the PlayStation Network or all these others publishers, but yeah, that's mainly it. Like technically, it's possible. Legally, or like if you're trying to sell stuff on the side and they are not getting a commission, you'll probably have an issue.
Thank you for coming. Whoever will hang out here, feel free to ask questions directly.